This session is just an introductory session to sort of tell you what a flipped classroom is and to give you an idea of the process you go through in order to flip your classroom. This is not necessarily based on the model that's out there. This is based on my experience, both as a classroom instructor and as an online instructor, and the experience I have as an instructional designer, because I think there's some pieces that people miss when they talk about the flipped classroom, and we'll discuss that. So I'm going to start a poll here. Now, this is the first time I've done polls in here. So I'm going to start a poll, and I would like you to rate your familiarity on the flipped classroom concept from 1 to 4, 1 being low and 4 being high. I see somebody's trying to get in, having trouble to get in. All right, so Sheila's not playing along, but Colleen and Robin are pretty familiar with it. So we won't spend a lot of time on what the flipped classroom is. Basically, the flipped classroom, you do your content delivery outside of the classroom as homework assignments. And in the classroom, you work on your upper level, your higher order cognitive skills, and you apply the information. And it's much more student-centered, much more active learning. Now, let's try another poll. Laura, I'm trying to figure out why Lori's having troubles getting in. I'm just doing this to in this poll, rate your familiarity with Bloom's taxonomy from 1 to 4. I was going to put 4, 1 being Bloom, who's Bloom, to 4. Do you want the cognitive, affective, or psychomotor domain? All right, so of course polls work better. I did that because I had used polls when I did my Adobe Connect session. Oh, there's a Lori. And I wanted to try polling as a new thing that they've added into Blackboard Collaborate. So I'm ending that poll. So that's not too bad. All right, so Bloom, we'll quickly review Bloom. Bloom's taxonomy is just a way to look at objectives and to classify your objectives and put them in some sort of logical order. In the classroom, the traditional classroom has the lower level Bloom's taxonomy, the remember, understand, apply level, taking place in the classroom. It's usually done by a lecture. It's the sage on the stage, but it is giving students information that they're supposed to take in and learn. And then outside of the classroom, our homework is the upper level ones where they're supposed to apply that information by analyzing and evaluating. But the problem is that's the hard stuff. And that's the stuff where they need feedback. They need you to be available to answer questions, and they don't necessarily have the opportunity to do that if this is homework. So the flipped classroom takes the approach of doing those low-level objectives as homework before class, using content is delivered online through various technologies before class, and then in class that frees you up to use the classroom activities and use those higher order objectives in the classroom. So that's why it's called a flipped classroom. Then you have, and this is a piece that a lot of people miss, is after class you still have more activities, and that's where you want your students to start building connections between all the content that they've had up until that point, to extend that learning beyond. So this is where you have your longer term projects, whether it's research papers or you know, preparation for the final exam. One of the things that I do is I give final exam questions, the essay questions, as we go along in the course. So their after class homework would be answering those more in-depth, more comprehensive final exam questions. So those are the sorts of things, and again, that's something that a lot of people miss, is that idea of there's still more work to be done outside of the class. Any questions so far? I know we're kind of zooming through that, but you said you were pretty familiar with the flipped classroom concept. If you have a question, you can just type it in the chat box. Or we can do, oh, you know what? Any questions? No, no. This is cool because I can go and look at the participant list and see who answered. Yes, Robin has a question. Question? What is your question, Robin? You can type it in the chat box. That was actually kind of cool. I've never elaborate. Well, it's really the same. I need to actually talk about some examples as we go through, but it would be the same idea as in the K through 12. The difference is you don't necessarily meet as many times per week. You don't meet every day like you would K through 12. When I taught psychology in the classroom, I only met once a week. I taught a night class. So they had all week to prepare for the night class. And then during that night class, we had the entire time for discussion, for in-class activities. Then I would, and longer term project, which would be their final essays for the final exam that they worked on outside of the classroom. So really, my experience is in higher education, and this is really how I see it used in higher education. The course that we were working on flipping, or the courses we were flipping for the grant, were both technology courses for our engineering department. And good thing about turning my camera off is you can't see me scratch my nose. We flipped a course on AutoCAD, computer-aided design, and on engineering graphics, which was more of a theoretical course. So in that case, they had activities that they had to do in terms of reading the textbook, and they had the first one we did, they read the textbook and watched videos that we found, and then took a quiz that they could take times. And then the second one we did, instead of the quiz, they had a small project that they had to do for homework in order to be prepared to come into class. Then their class time was spent actually working on AutoCAD projects. Any other questions? You're welcome. Here's in my 5 steps. I meant to change that. The first step is analyze your objectives. And you know, my background, I have a very weird background, but I've been in education for 36 years now, and I've been an instructional designer for over 30 years now. And so this is a step that I think is important, that you look at what it is you want to achieve, and then you decide what it is that you're going to do in class, what it is that you're going to do out of class. And that's where Bloom's taxonomy comes in very handy, because again, you want to do your in-class activities to be at the top of the pyramid, and your before-class activities to be at the bottom of the pyramid. So here's an example. This is an actual question that I use in my psychology class. It's part of a larger scale essay question, a long-term essay question. Using Maslow's hierarchy of needs, explain your motivation for taking this course. So that is clearly an up-level objective. They have to evaluate their motivation for taking this and then apply Maslow's hierarchy, analyze their motivation, all that sort of thing in order to answer this question. But to get to that point, there are certain things that they need to know. For example, they need to know, and again, that's that bottom level, they need to be able to list the levels in the hierarchy, in Maslow's hierarchy. They have to understand how those different levels become motivating. According to Maslow, you know, the upper levels don't become motivating until the lower level needs are met. They have to be able to apply that knowledge and understanding to a new situation. And then we're at the upper levels, which is examine their motivation for taking the course. So all of those objectives and that analysis goes into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and being able to use it to identify or to describe their motivation for taking the course. So now that I've done this, I would look at this and say, all right, so I need to have content for them to complete on before the class where they learn what the levels of the hierarchy is, they learn how the different levels become motivating, and maybe I have an assessment where they have to identify the level of motivation for that given situation. But analyze, that is an objective that would be better handled with an in-class activity. Let me go back. So, or I could even use that apply level and do that during class. So that middle area there can be either done as an assessment before class, like a low-level application, or I could say, well, when they come into class, maybe I'll have them work in groups and give each group a different situation and have them identify the level of motivation and then explain to the class why they chose that particular level of motivation, and have have a discussion on how, if another group has a different assessment of it. And then we could have a large group discussion about their motivation for taking the course, because a lot of students are going to say, I took it because I taught a general studies course. Psychology was a general studies elective. So they took it because they had to. They needed a psych course. Or they took it because they were interested in psychology. And then that leads into a discussion that intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So all of these things can lead to higher discussions. Are there any questions on objective analysis? I could literally talk a week on writing objectives and analyzing them and ordering them. So that's a pretty quick overview of analyzing objectives. The idea is you have to know what the foundational knowledge is. You have to identify what those upper level things are you want them to accomplish, and then identify those foundational objectives that build on them. Yes, Colleen, excellent question. So Colleen's question is, aren't we bound by the standard syllabus? You can get creative and go beyond what is black and white. You need to meet the objectives of the syllabus, but you are not limited by the objectives of the syllabus, if that makes sense. So my standard course syllabus might be just to list the steps, I forget what it says, but it might be describe Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, I don't think that's enough. I want to go beyond that to the higher level of analysis and evaluation, and get them, yeah, and I think that they often are, because those are the easy ones to evaluate. So So let me finish with Colleen. Yes, so I think you can go beyond that, but you are, your lower boundary is the syllabus, but you can go beyond that. You are not limited by the syllabus. You must meet the needs of the syllabus, but you are not limited by the needs of the syllabus. Do all learning styles do well with a flipped classroom? Lori, I think that is a very valid point. And I think that's something that we'll get at in the last session, which are how to avoid the pitfalls. Because there are some students who may not be motivated, who learn better via lecture than they do watching a video or whatever other activity. So you have to have a mixture of activities and a mixture of content delivery styles in order to meet different learning styles. But one of the things that I find happens is people will rise to your expectations. So while you can still be, like your question about having time to analyze something, you actually have more time in the classroom then to spend time analyzing when you are doing a flipped classroom, because you're not spending that time providing content delivery. So does that make sense? So you can, and you have more flexibility because you can change, you might give them more time to analyze. If somebody wants some more time to listen to what other people are saying or to do some thinking on their own, and you have the flexibility of saying maybe one person wants to do something on their own while other people want to work together. So you're given a little more flexibility than when the more traditional model. Does that make sense? Great. Excellent. And again, I will say the flipped classroom is not all sunshine and roses. There are a lot of issues with it, and I think you've just identified one of them. And that's when the last set I have about the 5 ways to avoid the pitfalls. That's something that I want to discuss, is trying to address the needs of all the students. So now you've got your objectives. You know what it is that you need to be able to teach to the students prior to coming to class. The next is to do your content selection. And this is where I think people sort of have a preconception about the flipped classroom, because they think they have to record their lectures. And I will say that watching a recorded lecture is probably the worst. Recording your lecture to present it online is probably the worst use of your time when it comes to a flipped classroom. Because, if the lecture in the classroom is boring, it's even more boring when you're watching it online. The very first job I had out of grad school after I got my master's in instructional design was I worked for NCR. And I had to do this project on key corporate accounting policies. They had these 8 accounting policies that account 80% of the accounting mistakes that this is a big company, NCR, been around for 100 years. And I had to develop training. They had done training on these policies before, but their training was an interactive video disc, which tells you how long it's been since I was in grad school. That was back in the 80s. And the video was literally someone reading the policies. Literally reading the policies. Well, people couldn't understand the policies and apply them correctly reading them themselves. Just having somebody read them to them wasn't going to make a difference. So I developed this training where I worked with these 2 accountants, one who was named John Cashdollar, and I will never forget that name. And I said, okay, I need for each policy, I need a policy statement, I need a description of how the policy is applied, I need 3 examples of it applied correctly, and I need 3 examples of it applied. So it was actually, and I included questions and made it interactive. So it was actual instruction about the policy, not just somebody reading the policy. So if you just record your lectures, that's no different than if the student was sitting in the classroom. You have an opportunity to do something very different when you're providing your content online. Because you have a wealth of resources out there that are free. A lot of us have, particularly in higher ed, it's different for K-12, but when we commit to a textbook, we have resources that the publisher gives us to use with the students. They might have to purchase an access code to use those resources, but the publisher provides those resources. I'm actually moving away from that and aggregating my own resources because there's so much stuff out there that is available. You have your textbook. So then I did what I call my partial flip of my psychology course. I just told students that they had to read the textbook before they came to class, and I gave them all of the material, all the videos that I used in class, all of the PowerPoints that I used, the links to any website that I used, provided all of that to them, and then each week they had to take a quiz. And I said if they got their quiz done before they came to class, they would have 3 tries and they get 2 bonus points. And just that level of flipping, which required no additional work on my part, or very little additional work on my part, raised the level of discussion in my class so much that again, this class met once a week at night. I actually had to keep pushing discussions back and say, okay, we'll finish this topic up next week, or finish this up the next week. I lost an entire discussion topic. I lost an entire topic. So what I normally would have done in 14 weeks expanded to 15 weeks, actually more than 15 weeks. So the discussion expanded just by having them take their quizzes before they came to class. The class discussion expanded by 10%. That simple change increased their level of discussion and increased their interest in the class, so that they were coming to class with questions and examples of their own. So now I only teach online, and I teach astronomy online and I teach psychology online. For my astronomy class, I've actually dropped the textbook, and I'm using materials from YouTube. I'm using open educational resources. PBS Learning Media has so many resources out there, and they're all available for free. Our library has films on demand. I have to digress here for my funny films on demand story. I was looking for my astronomy course. I was looking for a little video clip that would explain the unusual precession of Mercury's orbit and how it relates to general relativity. And I had been looking for several days trying to find this to incorporate it into a lesson. Couldn't find it. Email comes through from the library saying we now have films on demand. Went there, typed in Mercury and general relativity, and found the exact perfect clip for what I needed to use. So that's another resource that we at LCC have available that I really think we're not using our own library resources enough. And then, of course, you can also create your own. I actually narrate PowerPoints. I use Office Mix, which we will be talking about next week, to aggregate all of this into a PowerPoint deck, incorporate assessment questions, and add my own narrations. As you can tell from my PowerPoint, I don't put a lot of text on PowerPoint, and that's what I do when I narrate PowerPoints for use in my online courses. So don't think that if you're flipping your classroom, you have to suddenly start doing all of your own videos. Because I've been struggling with Adobe Premiere this week. I can't even get it to work in my office. So I'm very glad that I have Spark Video and all these other resources to create videos for what I need, but also to get them from other locations as well and other content. And again, some people may not learn best from watching videos. They may learn better from reading, or they may learn better from interactive activities. So you have to consider all of those things in providing the content online or outside of the classroom. The other thing that people forget in the before class activities is the assessment piece of it. And this is the piece that that it really annoys me that people don't talk about this, because students are stupid. They don't know what it is they don't know. That's why they're here. If they could learn this stuff on their own, they would. So you need to include in your out-of-class activities or your before-class activities some way for students to assess their level of understanding. They know, should I go back and review this? Do I really understand this? If they don't understand it, if they don't have the ability to do that assessment, they're just going to, you know, do the reading or watch the video, and that's it. And that's not active learning. That's passive learning. So you need to include some sort of assessment, whether, and again, we are at Blackboard College. We use Blackboard Learn. So whether it's a quiz on Blackboard, whether it's, and then next week we're going to talk about Office Mix, which is an add-in for PowerPoint. If it's assessments that you include in a narrated PowerPoint, so you have to provide some way for students to not only to guide student learning when they're not in the classroom, but also to allow them to assess their own level of understanding. And I think, again, that's a piece that a lot of people don't talk about when they talk about flipped classroom. They talk about making videos and putting them online, and that's it. And that's not enough. You have to provide that assessment piece. So do we have any questions up till now? Any questions? I kind of like this polling thing. No, okay. Goodbye, thank you for showing up. All right, classroom activities. Big thing about classroom activities, they have to be student-centered. And that's kind of the whole point about flipping the classroom, is that you're getting away from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. So the activities that you do in the classroom should be, first of all, and again, a key part of the word activity is active. Students should be engaged in active learning rather than passive learning. It should be student-centered, so that students are, for example, maybe you have small group discussions. You may have student presentations. You may have peer-to-peer instruction. So you may have a opportunity for, one of the best ways to learn something is to teach something that you just learned to somebody who doesn't understand it yet. And one of the best people to learn from is to learn from somebody who just learned it, because they remember how they learned it. When this is a whole field of study, is the expert-novice dichotomy in learning, and we as teachers are the experts, but we are fairly far removed from when we learned something. So as we are teaching it, we may not remember how we learned it. Somebody who just learned it and just understood it remembers how they understood it, remembers that learning it, and they are sometimes better suited to explain to somebody who doesn't quite get it yet. So, excuse me, this is why some of these student-to-student interactions actually make for better learning overall than just teacher-student interactions. There's also a concept called, there are a lot of these types of activities, but the jigsaw activity, where each student is responsible for one piece of learning, and then they come back, or you could have each group of students be responsible for one piece of learning, and they come back and then they put it all together. They're responsible for teaching that to the other students, and they put it all together like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. So there's a session, excuse me again, in a few weeks where I'll talk about some in-class activities, and we'll go into more depth on some of those things. But the key thing about the classroom activities is that, again, they need to be active and they need to be student-centered and not just a passive delivery of content. Even just have just a large group discussion. And they also have to be planned. You need to plan these in advance. And sometimes you need to have a backup plan too. And the fifth step is to be prepared. Like I said, it's not all sunshine and roses, and you don't have to flip your entire course to start with. I actually disagree with one of the people that is involved in this grant. He's actually at another college. He's fairly new out of grad school, and when I first got involved in this whole activity, he started explaining Bloom's taxonomy to me, and I was this close to saying, honey, I learned Bloom's taxonomy before you were born. But his point of view is that you should not combine a flipped approach with a traditional approach, and I disagree. I think you should start small and gradually build up to a flipped course or a flipped classroom. Pick a flippable moment. Pick a topic that you think would work very well with the flip, and just start with that. It might be, hey kids, next week we're going to try this new approach to learning. You're going to do these things outside of the class, and in class we're going to do something else. But you don't have to do your entire course. Exactly, Robin. I think that's the big thing, because that's my next point, is that you got to educate your students to the process. Because students aren't used to this. The first time I did the pre-class quizzing, in fact, I didn't do just pre-class quizzing. I let them, if they took their quiz before they came to class, they got 3 tries plus 2 bonus points. But if they waited until after they came to class, they could still do it. They just didn't get the 3 tries or the bonus points. So you have to be prepared for those students who aren't going to embrace this right away. And one way to do that is to just, I'm sorry, I've got this thing in my throat this afternoon. One way to do it is to start slow and just give them a finite period of saying, we're going to try this out and see what works and what doesn't. Because otherwise it can be very overwhelming, not only for you, but for your students. But I like that concept of acclimation. It does give you a chance. And even, I would say, you could try something early in the semester and then go a little bit more later in the, I talk semesters because I'm higher ed, but early in the school year and later in the school year. So you could try something, might do it 1 week and then say, well, learn what we learned from that. Let's do it again a month later and try it for a couple of weeks. But again, a key part of it is to prepare the students beforehand and let them know what it is they're responsible for doing and how it's different from what they've traditionally done. Another thing is to incentivize the flip. And this is where, again, where I think people are realistic. Again, this is new. You got to get students to embrace this concept of the flipped classroom. The experience that the engineering instructor had, it's kind of a long story, but I'll keep it short, was students embraced it. Our traditional students embraced it, where the non-traditional students did not. And the grant happens to address non-traditional students, so that was a whole other cluster, you know what. And it's actually what I said was going to happen, but what do I know? I've only been doing it for 36 years. So the non-traditional students didn't embrace it. So I said, we've got to figure out a way to incentivize it. Because what they were doing, they had learned to game the system. That if they didn't do these activities before they came to class, he would work with them one-on-one in the lab to get them up to speed, and then they would do their lab assignment. So the students who did do the activities before they came to class were able to finish their lab activity and get out of lab earlier. But the ones who didn't do it, his time was taken up with the ones who chose not to participate in the flipped learning activities. And because he wasn't used to the process, and they weren't used to the process, and there wasn't a whole lot of support in this whole thing, that they got away with it. So they really got individualized instruction by not doing the homework. So it was a matter of, you can't do it that way. You have to come up with a different way. And I suggested what we call the naughty corner, or what I call the naughty corner. You know, it's for the students who've been naughty and they haven't done their homework. But they would have an area in the lab where they could, if they don't do the work before they come to class, then they have to go and do the work in the lab by themselves before they can actually work on their lab projects. So they don't get the benefit of either getting out of lab early or learning more in-depth material that the other students were learning because they had more time. But again, that's a piece that a lot of people don't talk about. And part of it is my background in psychology and a background in, well, in particular educational psychology and instructional design. Reinforcement always works better than punishment. So you aren't punishing the students by putting them in the naughty corner. What you're doing is reinforcing the appropriate behavior of the students who did the work ahead of time and not reinforcing the inappropriate behavior of the students who didn't. So, and again, that's part of the discussion about the pitfalls and how to design in-class activities that we'll do later on. But that's part of your preparation as well. And the final be prepared is be prepared for resistance, not only from students, but you may, support of your administration to do this. You may need support of your fellow faculty members, and you may meet resistance from them as well, because they may not see the benefits of the flip. So that's another argument in favor of just starting out small, because you can gather data on how well students do. You can identify where the pitfalls are and make adjustments the next time you try flipping some content. But that's all part of the preparations. Be prepared for those people, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom, who aren't going to necessarily embrace the concept of flipping the classroom. Last chance for questions. Any questions on, this is a pretty quick overview of the flipped classroom process, but it's a setup for what we'll be talking about for the next 4 weeks to get into some more of the nitty-gritty. Is there anything that you'd like me to give a little more detail on? I keep mentioning the next sessions next week. How to flip higher ed classes online? In what way? Because that's really what I've been talking about. It's really the same process, I think. That Robin, in terms of flipping higher ed versus K-12, what exactly do you think the difference would be? Okay. The process, and again, I think the same process applies, where you start small. So are you a student, or are you an instructor, or both? Well, you're okay. Well, let me answer Sheila's question about incentive. Sheila, some of the students just will never do it. And that is just the reality. Just like they don't do in the traditional classroom, they don't participate. So you provide incentives to try to get as many to do the work as possible. And those that won't do it, they just won't do it. And you just can't fall into the trap of then reteaching everything that they were supposed to do outside of the classroom. You can provide methods for them to do that in the classroom. So like in our labs here, if you're doing, I don't know, say you're teaching Access or something, and you had activities that they were supposed to do before class for learning Access, whether it was watching videos or whatever. If they're not going to participate in the work before class, you could always have a couple of computers in our lab set up with headphones and say, all right, you didn't do it before you came to class, so you're going to do it for class, and then you've got this homework to do outside of class. And they still need to do the work, but you're not going to then go and play their game of teaching them separately while other people are working on their projects in classrooms. So the people who are in the classroom still have you to, as they're creating their Access database, you're still there to answer their questions, and the others are who, the 2 or 3 who aren't doing anything, are going to have to do the work. And if they don't, they're just going to fail the class. And that's the beauty of higher ed, is we can do that. For online courses now, and that's sort of a different beast than the flipped classroom, because you don't have the in-class portion of it. Although you can do this sort of activity in classroom, and as a classroom you can meet online in Collaborate or in Adobe Connect, something like that. And both of those programs have breakout groups. So if you have a group of people, you can assign them to breakout groups, give them group activities to work with online. So you can still do the same sort of thing in an online class. But for, you know, I teach higher ed. So for my psychology course, if I were still teaching in the classroom, what I would do is create these activities using something like Office Mix, or using and incorporating Spark Video and Spark Page into Office Mix, and create these learning activities where, let's see if I, let me see if I can share one with you. Give me just a minute to get that set up. Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain, but this is what I use for my astronomy course that I'm been redesigning it this semester as I teach it, which is, and taking 3 of Adobe Gen Pro courses. I must be stupid. All right, come on, big fella. All right, let's do this. So I'm just going to do, no, stupid. I think any of us who are taking all 3 of the Gen Pro ones need to get a special badge if we manage to complete all of them in this fall. I'm going to start sharing my browser window, so things are going to go a little funky for a minute. And let's do this until I flip over. So you should now see something that says Office Mix, the sun's structure in it. Let me go back and see. Okay, so let me go back over there. All right, so this is a finished Office Mix. And again, it's an add-on for PowerPoint, so you create it just like you do a PowerPoint, but you can include things. Let's look at the sun's structure from the inside out. First thing we want to do is look at the structure of the sun. Now, this little image shows you how big the sun is in comparison to the Earth. So that is a scale photo. Of course, the Earth isn't that close to the sun. So this is just like narrating a regular PowerPoint. So I'm going to skip ahead. So in this list, so thermal energy movement. Thermal energy, if you, this doesn't have a good one. Well, it relates to the sun because the different layer out from the core is the radiative zone. Now, you might guess that energy is transported through the radiative zone via radiation. So the actual photons are distributing the energy that is created in. So that is an actual PowerPoint animation, and it transfers over to your mix very nicely. Let me keep going. Having energy radiate out by a, what's that process take? The path of a. Okay, then the other thing you can incorporate are questions. So I've already answered this question. Let me retry it. All right, so how is energy? Let's try conduction and radiation. That's wrong, by the way. Incorrect. I can try again. All right, so submit. Yay. And I've incorporated, do I have any videos in this one? Yes. Okay, let me go to slide 15. And I can jump to a specific slide.
Sun is a beautifully magnetically driven star, but we can't actually see magnetic field lines. They're essentially invisible, and so we have to turn to models in order for us to see the global magnetic structure of the sun. What we're looking at here is one such model.
So you can include videos, you can include links to web pages, certain kinds of web pages. I can include a Spark video in here. I can include a Spark page in here. So those are just, but the key thing is that I can include portion of the spectrum. That's the sun's corona, beautiful. I can include questions. Photosphere, let's see, maybe it's, no, I could also, I didn't do it yet, I could provide feedback on each one of these. So try again, correct. And that is what an office mix is. So that to me is what a, let me stop sharing that because that's going to get crazy. That to me is what a, hold on, is what a, let me jump to the right slide here. When I talk about content selection and online activities, that to me would be an example of how you could aggregate your content together and include that assessment portion for students to prepare for coming into the class. If you're doing something, because this is very content knowledge level heavy content. If you're doing something like teaching a computer class, if you're teaching you know, Adobe Premiere, which is the bane of my existence right now, instead of having multiple choice questions, you might have a small project that they have to complete like we do in the e-learning classes, rather than, and have that be something that students do offline and go into, allow them to explore more of the in-depth, the upper level activities in, you know, Premiere, Pro, whatever, in the classroom. Does that answer your question? I'll tell you, when I and also Office Mix integrates well with Blackboard. And when I found Office Mix and found that it integrated and figured out how to integrate it with Blackboard, I was all over that like white on rice. I just think it really takes my online classes to the next level. It really makes them interactive rather than more passive. Any other questions? Let me go through, and just a reminder, trying to get my last slide here. Okay. Topics for the upcoming sessions. What I just showed you with Office Mix, I'll be talking about next week. And after that, I've mentioned, and Robin's familiar with this, I've mentioned Spark Video and Spark Page. Those are two free Adobe products I think are marvelous ways to get started with some very ways to create engaging videos and web pages that you can use with your students, and your students can use as well. And then we'll talk about the in-class activities, and then some a few tips for how to avoid some of the pitfalls. And we've talked about a lot of that already.